Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. Have you ever wondered if the groundbreaking innovations we see, like AI, come with a hidden cost for the rest of the economy? Today, we're focusing on America's AI boom and its perceived impact on the broader economic landscape. We'll be drawing insights primarily from The Economist, but crucially, we'll also layer in additional, often contrasting analysis to give you a truly comprehensive picture. Our mission here is to understand what's really driving the economic shifts in this AI era, beyond the headlines.
That's absolutely right. Our goal isn't just to summarize. We're going to unpack the nuances, maybe challenge some of the assumptions you might encounter, and truly highlight the underlying forces at play. It's a complex story, and it's far more intricate than a simple boom or bust narrative suggests.
Okay, let's unpack this then. If artificial intelligence models have a spiritual hometown, it's probably Ashburn, Northern Virginia. When you're flying into Dulles, you might just glimpse these clusters of white-roofed boxes next to suburban streets. These aren't just any buildings, they're part of the world's biggest data center cluster. Last year alone, they guzzled over a quarter of the power produced by Virginia's main electrical utility.
A quarter? Wow.
Yeah. So if AI has a spiritual hometown, it's Ashburn, Northern Virginia, and it's powered by, a lot of electrons. It sounds like those white-roofed boxes are throwing a massive permanent party for the grid.
It certainly seems that way from the power consumption figures.
But the macro impact is even more remarkable. Despite fears of an economic slowdown across America, the pace of AI infrastructure building is just breakneck. The Economist points out that something like a sixth of the 2% rise in American real GDP over the past year has come directly from investments in computer and communications equipment. That includes the specialized chips and the data centers themselves.
Right, the hardware investment alone is significant.
Exactly. And this is where the picture gets more complex. If you factor in grid upgrades needed to power these AI models, plus the intellectual property value of the software itself, one estimate puts the boom's contribution to real GDP growth at a remarkable 40%.
40%, that's huge.
40%. It really is a significant figure, especially for a sector that's still, a relatively small percentage of America's total GDP overall.
What's fascinating here is the notable shift in how this massive build-out is being financed. Historically, big tech firms largely paid for such immense investments using their enormous earnings and existing cash reserves.
Not piles of cash, right?
Their war chests. Exactly. But now, the sheer scale of construction has become so vast that even these industry titans are increasingly turning to borrowing. This really underscores the deep belief that AI will drive explosive economic growth and demand for computing power in the coming years. This isn't quite like building houses or traditional factories. It feels more like a high-reward, maybe winner-takes-all market, where traditional concerns, like the cost of borrowing, are almost, maybe too easily set aside for the potential payoff.
And The Economist even draws that comparison to the dotcom era, suggesting that the current mania, as they put it, could have much further to run. They argue that the rollout of costly technology during the dot-com boom continued for many years, eventually having an even sharper impact on GDP than we've seen so far with AI.
That's an interesting point.
What stands out, though, is their claim that the early enthusiasm for AI might even surpass that of the internet's youth. Back in the Y2K era, few expected the web to lead to mass automation or unprecedentedly fast economic growth. But with AI, those kinds of predictions, mass automation or extremely rapid economic expansion, are now fairly mainstream, at least in Silicon Valley circles.
Right, the hype level feels different this time, maybe more focused on fundamental economic transformation.
Now, this is where The Economist introduces its core argument about what they call the squeeze. They contend that the very sector powering so much of America's economic growth is simultaneously squeezing the rest of its output. They cite examples like house builders being highly sensitive to higher borrowing costs.
Okay, that makes sense with higher rates.
And then make a more pointed claim that data centers have also constrained the rest of the economy by keeping energy prices high. And here's a specific figure they offer. Average American electricity bills have risen by 7% so far in 2025, at least in part due to the extra strain data centers have put on the grid. So what does this all mean for you, the average consumer?
Okay, this raises an important question about that national power bill claim. While The Economist highlights a 7% rise, partly due to data centers, the national signal, when we look at the federal data, like from the EIA, the Energy Information Administration.
You've been a government source for this stuff.
Exactly. Their data is actually quite mixed. For instance, the EIA expected average summer residential bills to rise by approximately 3% this year. And while the average residential price per kilowatt hour was indeed up about 6.5% year over year in May,
Yeah.
that increase was primarily driven by broader factors like weather patterns, heat waves, fluctuating fuel costs for power generation, and specific utility rate cases approved in different regions.
So not just data centers causing a national surge.
Well, AI demand does create significant regional price pressure, absolutely, especially in places like Northern Virginia, as you mentioned, and parts of Texas. But it's probably more accurately described as a regional price pressure, national capacity story, rather than a blanket national increase simply because of data centers. The national picture is more complicated.
Okay, that distinction is absolutely crucial. It really changes how you think about the impact, doesn't it? The Economist then goes on to suggest a broader crowding out argument. They describe an economy-wide reallocation where interest rate and energy-sensitive sectors are contributing less to growth, while AI investment contributes more.
Essentially, their argument is that AI is pushing other parts of the economy aside. Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's important to refine that crowding out perspective a bit. Crowding out isn't necessarily an inherent or unavoidable consequence of all this AI capital expenditure, the money spent building these facilities. It's actually, I'd argue, policy contingent, which means it's largely driven by specific conditions we have right now, like those high interest rates and the existing grid bottlenecks.
So it depends on other factors. It's not AI itself doing the crowding out.
Exactly. If we tackle those root causes, the pressure eases significantly. Think of it like this. AI is a high-performance engine, right? But if we don't build the right roads and refueling stations, if the policy and infrastructure aren't aligned, then we're not going to see its full potential. It's not necessarily the engine's fault. It's the infrastructure around it. For example, if interconnection timelines for new power sources shorten, or if utilities implement what are called large load tariffs.
Special prices for big users.
Yeah, special pricing agreements for massive power users, like data centers. Or if they utilize behind-the-meter supply, where data centers actually generate some of their own power on site, then the crowd-out pressure falls significantly. Dominion's Northern Virginia pipeline, which has, 40 gigawatts contracted?
40 gigawatts?
Yeah, in stages. It already demonstrates how dedicated pricing and infrastructure can kind of segment this market, rather than having AI compete for the exact same electrons and substations that everyone else needs.
Okay, so given these nuances, is the simple AI equals growth engine narrative perhaps a bit too simplistic then? It sounds like there's more to it than just a rising tide lifting all boats for everyone in the U.S.
Absolutely. I think it is too simplistic. While big capital expenditure, like on AI infrastructure, can certainly lift the headline GDP figures, a critical nuance is that much of the value add can actually leak to imported components.
Leak? How so?
Well, we're talking about things like the high-performance accelerators, those specialized processing units crucial for AI training or other specialized chips. Many are designed here but manufactured overseas. This means the full economic benefits, like, say, manufacturing jobs and local spending associated with making those components, aren't always fully realized within U.S. borders. So that kind of blunts the domestic multiplier effects you typically expect from such significant investment.
Got it. So while GDP numbers might look impressive, the actual broad welfare and direct economic benefits within the U.S. economy might not be quite as widespread as the simple AI equals growth engine line suggests.
Precisely. It tempers that narrative.
This brings us back to the Economist's dotcom parallels. They suggest the mania could have much further to run. But if we apply this deeper analysis, what are the critical differences and conditions that might make this boom play out differently than the late 1990s?
Yeah, the comparison is interesting, but the context is really different. What's fascinating here is that the 1990s dot-com boom rode a very different economic wave. It was characterized by falling interest rates, which made borrowing cheap.
Right, money was easier to come by?
And what we call a slack electrical grid, meaning there was plenty of spare capacity. It wasn't really a constraint back then. Today's AI boom, in stark contrast, collides with significantly constrained transmission infrastructure, meaning bottlenecks in moving electricity where it's needed, and higher real rates on borrowing, much higher.
So tougher conditions on two key fronts, power and money.
Exactly. And this leads to what I'd call more bimodal potential outcomes. It's less certain. Either we successfully solve the critical issues of power and permitting and truly unlock AI's massive productivity potential, or the sheer pace of capital expenditure hits unavoidable walls. These walls could be a lack of specialized chips, not enough power availability, or even just the challenges of siting new infrastructure, getting permits. In that latter scenario, the squeeze we're discussing shows up not necessarily as a clean bust like 2000, but maybe as significant volatility, project delays, localized price spikes.
Okay, so if the autonomous initial framing of a simple squeeze is maybe a bit too straightforward, what are the truly binding constraints on AI's growth right now, and what will actually ease this pressure we've been discussing? Beyond just abstract interest rates, what are the concrete bottlenecks making things challenging on the ground?
Yeah, the genuine critical bottlenecks extend beyond just the cost of money. First, there's power. And that's complex. It involves interconnection challenges, literally the process of getting new power plants or solar farms plugged into the grid, which can take years. It's also about the actual mix of fuel sources generating that electricity, and perhaps, surprisingly, local opposition to building new transmission lines or power plants. Think NIMBYism, not in my backyard.
Right, everyone wants the power, but not the power lines nearby.
Precisely. That's a real constraint. Second, we have supply chains, particularly for those incredibly specialized high-performance computing, or HPC, chips, and also the advanced cooling solutions these massive data centers require. They generate immense heat. And third, the finance mix itself is changing, as we mentioned, with an increasing reliance on more debt-funded, rate-sensitive financing. That adds a layer of vulnerability if rates stay high or go higher.
Okay, so power, supply chains, and the financing model. What about solutions? What could actually ease this squeeze?
Well, to truly ease it, we need concrete, targeted solutions. This includes things like those large load tariffs and on-site generation we touched on, where data centers may be paid differently for power or generate some themselves. We also need faster PJM-ISO interconnects. That refers to the regional grid operators like PJM in the Mid-Atlantic or ISO New England. Speeding up their approval processes is crucial for getting new power online quickly.
Cutting through the red tape, essentially.
In a way, yes, while maintaining reliability. And crucially, zoning for multi-gigawatt campuses is essential. We need places where these huge facilities can be built efficiently. Along with that goes significant regional transmission build-out, more high-voltage power lines. That's a big one. Finally, aligning AI capital expenditure with demand response mechanisms would be key.
Demand response, what's that? That means AI facilities could potentially reduce their power consumption during peak demand times, like on a hot afternoon when everyone's running air conditioning. This would help prevent non-AI industries or even residential customers from being priced out or facing grid strain and potential brownouts. They become part of the solution, not just the problem.
Interesting. So making the data centers themselves more flexible grid participants. Given all these insights, how fragile is America's growth right now if, for whatever reason, this AI capital expenditure were to suddenly stall or slow down significantly? What's the vulnerability there for the broader economy? That's a really important question. If you look at the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the BEA data, which tracks all U.S. economic activity, it clearly shows that current growth is, frankly, leaning heavily on equipment and software investment, much of which is related to this AI build-out. So if that pillar of AI-linked capital expenditure were to be pulled or even just significantly slowed down, the current economic mix leaves a pretty significant hole. That hole would only really be filled if other sectors like housing and broader business investment across the economy could somehow re-accelerate quite quickly to compensate. And that's a big if right now.
So it's become a really critical driver of growth, maybe more than we realize.
It seems that way, at least in the current configuration. So the bottom line here is that the economist is certainly right that AI investment is propping up U.S. growth figures, and it is placing a strain on electrical grids, particularly regionally. But that data center takeover frame they use, it tends to mash together what are really distinct issues: specific regional power stress with broader national inflation and crowd-out concerns. As we discussed, national electricity bills aren't soaring purely because of AI. Not yet, anyway.
Right. The link isn't that direct on a national level.
Exactly. The genuine pervasive risk isn't some simple mania that will inevitably bust, like a bubble popping. It's really about execution, the practical challenges, getting enough power where it's needed, navigating complex permitting processes for everything from data centers to transmission lines, and securing the necessary supply chains for chips and cooling. If these frictions can be eased and managed effectively, AI's macro lift could prove much more durable and broadly beneficial. If not, then the squeeze manifests more subtly perhaps, and higher local prices in certain areas, delayed projects, and ultimately a far more fragile overall growth mix for the U.S. economy.
So the real takeaway here feels like, well, AI's macro lift isn't some automatic given. It really hinges entirely on our ability collectively to navigate the nitty-gritty of execution, the power lines, the permits, the supply chains. For you, the listener, the question isn't just if AI will continue to grow, but maybe how effectively we can clear the path for it without causing too much disruption elsewhere. It's about managing the growth, not just celebrating it.
That's a great way to put it. It's about the how.
Thanks for listening. Follow us to stay updated with the latest insights on The Economist every day. And don't forget to like, comment, and share.